everybody, welcome to the American Labor Museum. I'm Evelyn Hershey. Today is November 21st, and for our Saturday labor art class today, we're going to talk briefly about a doer, a dreamer, and a reformer. One of my heroes or heroines in labor history, and her name is Mary Harris Mother Jones. Mother Jones was a nickname that she earned later in life. And this is a photo of her on the cover of a very nice book that you can borrow from the museum's library by Penny Coleman. And you can see Mother Jones' picture in the center, and over to the side, a photograph of a worker. Let me tell you a little bit about Mary Harris Mother Jones. And then for our art project, we'll need a paper, a pencil, and markers preferably, so that we can create bubble letters and make a banner or a sign. They were really important in Mother Jones' day. Well, Mary Harris, as she was known when she was born, came from Ireland. It was her birthplace. She was born there in 1830, and she emigrated to America. In the 1860s, she met and married her husband, Mr. Jones. She and Mr. Jones had 4 children and lived and worked in the Midwest near Chicago. In 1867, in Chicago, the entire city was plagued by yellow fever. Mary lost her entire family to the disease. Her husband died, then her 4 children. After this tragedy, she was left alone. In order to support herself, she began to work as a seamstress, sewing clothes for wealthy families. She also worked in textile factories, and in those factories she worked alongside young children. Yes, children as young as 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old worked in harsh industrial settings. And Mary Jones saw their lives at work close up, and seeing their lives made her want to do something about it. Young children, she believed, as did many other reformers, shouldn't be in workplaces, but should have a chance to be kids, to go to school and to play. So let me look in our book and share a little bit more of her story using some of the pictures that are in the book. Penny Coleman, the author, collected a lot of photos of children at work, and these are the kinds of kids that Mary Harris Jones ran into when she worked into the factories too. Notice the boy climbing on the big machine has no shoes on his feet. He went to work without them, and probably didn't have shoes because they were expensive and his family couldn't afford to buy him any. There were very young children working in textile mills. Little girls and boys, barefooted, Mother Jones said, walked up and down between the endless rows of spindles, reaching their little hands into the machinery to repair snapped threads. They crawled under machinery to oil it. They replaced spindles all day long and all night through. Tiny babies of 6 years old with faces of 60 did an 8-hour shift for 10 cents a day. If they fell asleep, cold water was dashed in their faces, and the voice of the manager yelled above the ceaseless racket of the factory. Toddling chaps of 4 years old were brought to the mills to help the older sister or brother of 10 years, but their labor was not paid. Mary Harris thought this was not right and not fair to the children or their families, and she wanted to do something about it. In 1903, at the age of 70, she traveled to Philadelphia, where there was a strike of textile workers. 100,000 workers had walked out of mills and were on strike, and among the group were 16,000 children. Can you imagine all those children out on strike too. Mother Jones thought this was her opportunity to do something for children in the mills. She knew that her work could help the kids if they had a little publicity. Well, the factory workers who were on strike said it's going to be hard to get the newspapers to write about these children because the mill owners, our bosses, own stock in the newspapers and they won't publish any stories that make the factories and their owners look bad. Mother Jones said, I have stock in these little children and I will find a way to make a little publicity. Well, if you know about Philadelphia or if you've ever visited, there's something very famous there called the Liberty Bell. In the same year, 1903, the Liberty Bell was paraded around the city. That gave Mother Jones an idea. I will make a parade too of the children of the mills. So Mother Jones gathered the striking children at City Hall in Philadelphia, where she made a speech. Newspaper reporters were there to record the story. And then Mother Jones led the children on a long march through New Jersey to Long Island, where President Teddy Roosevelt's summer home was located, and Roosevelt was there at that time. Newspapers began to write about the little army of Mother Jones. As they marched from town to town through the state of New Jersey, supportive families and communities provided food and places to stay as they traveled from day to day to Oyster Bay, Long Island. They arrived at Teddy Roosevelt's summer home and knocked on the door to speak with him, to tell him about the horrors of child labor, and to demand that children have the opportunity to go to school. As they stood before his home, many of the children carried signs. Remember, there were no smartphones in 1903. When people communicated, they wrote things down. They printed them in newspapers, and sometimes they made signs and banners, like we're going to do today as our art project. Look at what the signs read. We want to go to school. Can you imagine carrying a sign like that? You might if you had to work in a factory for many hours every day. More school, less hospital. Another sign reads, we only ask for justice. What is justice? What does it mean to have justice, to be treated fairly? When the children got to the home of President Teddy Roosevelt with Mother Jones, the secretary of the president answered the door and said the president could not meet with Mother Jones and her little army, that the issue of child labor was really something that belonged to each individual state to address and not the federal government. Well, Mother Jones and the children were not discouraged. They knew that the publicity of their march would bring the horrors of child labor to the eyes and ears of many Americans across the country, and that through time and persistence, laws would be written in the states and eventually a federal law to protect children, to ensure that they did not work at young ages and that they could go to school. So Mother Jones is very much celebrated today as a doer, a dreamer, and a reformer. So I'd like to ask you to take a few minutes to watch the short video about how to make bubble letters that is attached to our website where this lesson is listed, and take the time to make your own banner calling for an end to child labor. What would your banner say if you were part of Mother Jones' little army fighting against child labor? So have fun making your art project, and I'll look forward to seeing you for our next Saturday labor art class.